If war had truly erupted between the United States and the Soviet Union, the 20th century would have been carved by fire instead of tension. The Cold War remained cold because of deterrence and fear, but if either side had crossed the line, history would have taken a catastrophic turn. The first blows would likely have come in Europe, where NATO and Warsaw Pact forces faced each other directly. Central Europe would have become the main battlefield, with tanks flooding across Germany, skies filled with bombers, and civilians caught in chaos. Cities like Berlin, Warsaw, and Frankfurt would have turned into ruins in weeks. Millions would have fled westward, overwhelming any system of support, while propaganda from both blocs framed the war as a fight for survival of their ideologies. At sea, the oceans would have burned with conflict. The Soviet Navy and American fleets would have clashed across the Atlantic, Arctic, and Pacific, with submarines prowling for nuclear launch opportunities. Strategic bombers would have filled the skies, pushing both superpowers closer to the unthinkable: nuclear escalation. Conventional fighting might have lasted days or weeks, but both sides had war doctrines that assumed nuclear use if defeat was imminent. That reality meant the world stood permanently on the edge of annihilation. Washington and Moscow would each weigh the cost of hesitation against the cost of extinction, and the decision could have come down to a single command in a bunker. If nuclear exchanges had begun, the devastation would not have been confined to the superpowers. Europe would have been shattered in hours. London, Paris, Warsaw, and Bonn could have been destroyed alongside Moscow, Leningrad, and Kiev. The United States might have seen New York, Chicago, and Washington disappear in flashes of light, while Soviet cities burned in return. The smoke and ash from hundreds of detonations would have blanketed the skies, plunging Earth into a nuclear winter. Crops would fail, global temperatures would drop, and famine would follow. The survivors would live in a scarred world where borders, governments, and even ideologies no longer mattered. Only survival. Yet it is possible the war might have remained limited, fought with conventional armies and proxy states while both sides pulled back from nuclear use at the last second. Even then, the scale of destruction in Europe and Asia would have reshaped global politics. Colonies still struggling for independence might have slipped from their masters without interference. Smaller nations would have been forced to choose sides or risk obliteration. China could have risen more quickly in the aftermath, filling the vacuum left by two exhausted superpowers. The war might have accelerated technological development in some areas: rocketry, medicine, communications, just as World War II had done, but the human cost would have been staggering. The greatest tragedy of such a war is that it would have erased the very future both nations claimed to fight for. The Soviet Union sought a communist world, the United States defended democracy, but nuclear ash and ruined cities would have left little room for either. Humanity would have stepped backward into a darker age, perhaps never recovering the same level of civilization. The Cold War showed that fear can restrain ambition, but had that fear snapped, the story of our world today would not be about internet and globalization. It would be about survival in a wasteland.